Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard.
Welcome to Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting set of guests. They're with the New York Humane Party. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Andrew.
Yes, nice to hear you here.
If we could get started by first you two giving our audience your names and also giving us a brief background sketch, a short bio about yourself.
Craig, I'm happy for you to go
okay.
first.
Okay, I was waiting to. I got involved with alternative party politics in the early 1990s.
Oh.
And that was originally with the Green Party. After having been a Democrat and being entirely frustrated, there wasn't yet at that point any formation for an animal rights specific party in New York, and not much activity yet on the United States level. In the 1990s, I ran for public office 6 times. Always on the Green Party at that time. So I had a lot of experience with ballot access issues. And during my first run for office, I had already been a vegetarian for some years and actually made a note of it in my campaign, and was interviewed by the alternative press, noting that they thought it was interesting that there was at the time a vegetarian running for office and being quite open about that. Years later, as I became frustrated with the lack of animal rights issues in politics, I actually formed the Green Party of the United States Animal Rights Committee. And the attempt was to make the Green Party more animal rights savvy, and that was 2018 at that point. And over time, I really became frustrated with the fact that the Green Party was not making the connection between other social justice issues and non-human animal social justice issues. So with that, myself and a couple of other people in that committee started working with and supporting Humane Party candidates, and understood the importance of creating a party which acknowledges animal rights as the issue. And that brings us to where we are today, in an attempt to get it going in New York City.
Okay.
So that's the brief version of my background, but that's where I am now with animal rights.
Sounds good. How about you, Tracey?
Yeah, so just a little bit about myself. I'm a technology person. I've always worked in computing in various different industries, and I think one thing technology gives you is actually an optimism about the future.
Oh, good.
And so and I think that plays into things like bringing animals into politics, because to me it's very much something that we should be striving for, and is part of the progress, shall we say, of society over time, and that we will get to that point eventually. So yeah, that's my background. And in terms of how I got involved with Humane Party, I was always cared about animals, and I was a vegetarian from when I was a child, basically. But I suppose as I got older, I kind of wanted to get a bit more involved. Excuse me. And I came across the Humane Party probably Googling, because I think like Craig, I was just unhappy with the lack of importance attached to animal issues in the mainstream parties. And so I think that's how I found the Humane Party. And I actually became vegan as a result of joining the Humane Party, because that is one of the things you have to, if you want to be if you actually want to have an official position with the Humane Party, you have to take an oath of being vegan. And at that point I wasn't.
wow.
So that's what made me actually is what pushed me over to that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I suppose I did it about reverse order to a lot of other people. So that's how I got involved. I signed up with interest, and then somebody from the Humane, Robin Miller, reached out to me and actually had a full one-on-one conversation with me. And that was why I decided to get involved. Yeah, so I guess that hopefully has addressed the brief background and of that history of getting involved with the Humane Party. So I think we covered a few of the bullet points there.
Yes, yep. It gives us a good understanding of where you came from and how you got there. So sure. I also, Tracey, you did touch on this in your introduction. Since your party is focused on animal rights, would you two kindly share your story about how you became vegan?
Sure. Go ahead, Craig.
Sure. Now, as I mentioned, I'd already been vegetarian for 30 years at one point, and had been running for office and been open about that. Interestingly, and probably not too different than many people who become vegan after having been vegetarian, one day I was playing with my cat and looked into his eyes, and just a button went off, a bell went off, that he's a being just like me. Looks a little bit different, but we communicate, we play, we have fun. And I thought to myself, this is the same with all beings. And although I had been vegetarian, I realized that dairy and eggs are products of enslavement, of animals being force bred to make products for humans. And I would never find that acceptable with my cat or people with their dogs or with their companion animals. And I said, this should be a fundamental basis for all animals. And this was in 2013. And at that point, I became vegan. I said, all animals deserve rights. And that moved me from vegetarianism to veganism, is the rights issue. All sentient beings, all human and non-human beings, have the right not to be enslaved and the right not to be commodified. And that's what made me vegan.
Oh, good. And Tracey, you mentioned that in your introduction. So if you care to expound briefly about that, we'd like to hear it.
Yeah, so like Craig, I've always kind of considered myself an animal lover, and as I say, partly why I went vegan was because of wanting to work with the Humane Party and recognizing that if you eat dairy and eggs also require enslavement of animals and disruption of their families and all of the associated costs with that. And on a sort of scientific front, I've always been interested in sort of the science of consciousness, which is still not there's not like a settled approach on that. But one thing most people who are philosophers or scientists in consciousness would say that animals are conscious, right? They may have different forms and they may not have language based, but they have a subjective sense of being, the word being, right? So why are they not given any appropriate rights within the political or legal process? And that was part of wanting to get involved with the Humane Party. And I have to say, one thing I wanted to point out is when I first heard that the Humane Party was advocating 100% vegan as part of the Constitution, at the time it seemed, and I hate to say, but it actually seemed a little bit extreme, because we're so indoctrinated to believe that animals are there and their status is radically different from our own. It sounded very kind of radical, as someone just average person just coming from the sort of background that we all have. And now I realize that it's not radical. Well, it is radical in the sense that it's not something that exists anywhere in the world. But really, as a philosophical thing, it's actually kind of obvious that is the way it should be. But we have all become sort of indoctrinated through historical treatment of animals pretty much across the world, that to accept these enslavements and violence as somehow normal or acceptable. And when you actually examine it with an open mind, you realize that this is terrible. This is just a kind of brainwashing, that in a sense that we've all been brought up with. So I also have my own kind of evolution from initial kind of, wow, that seems a bit radical, everyone's meant to be vegan, but then realizing that, well, actually that's just a natural consequence of following a fairly reasonable moral inferences, I guess.
Sure. So Chris, since you ran for office before, kindly tell our audience what lessons you learned from running for office and how you're applying those lessons now.
The biggest challenge is two challenges, actually. One is ballot access, but the other, which is very important, is how to do outreach and how to do it effectively. Because when you're into alternative party politics, it's hard to break people. It's just like how hard it is to break people from eating animal products. It's trying to do that outreach and how to message in a way that reaches the broadest people. So what I've learned and still learning is how to do messaging so that people can understand how it relates to the other issues. And for me, I work in media. I do video professionally. So I took it upon myself to start doing more video relating to animal issues. And I did that post running for office, so that the message has to, in order for people's mindsets to change, so that they're willing to vote for and support a party, such as the Humane Party that supports animal rights. The animal rights message has to become as ubiquitous as possible. So I started following the activist movements in New York City that were all focused on different kinds and diversity of animal rights issues. And one of the things that I found is that they need to be connected. They're very diverse and separate, and sometimes not communicating well together, and most importantly, not communicating well together politically. And that political element is important, and it's kind of what drove me to become active in the Humane Party, because there's a base that can do that in New York. And I found that running for office, that I was able to connect issues in a way that people's conceived notions of partisan politics breaks down, because there's a way to find uniting issues. And I actually think animal rights are a uniting issue because it connects to not only social justice issues, but economic issues, to health issues, and even to housing issues. It's actually what I consider a broad-based root issue. So what my mission is in life, and why I'm involved in the Humane Party, is that in running for office, I find you can work on making that connection in a way that translates to having a real impact. And that impact is eventually to elect people and to change laws. And with that, you can change people's notions of what is right and what is just and what is fair.
Sure. Sounds good. So what are the major issues you're facing in New York, and what does your New York party platform have to say about those and other things?
So I'll talk a little bit about this. So sorry, what was the first question? Was the major issues we have?
Yeah, the major issues in New York that you're facing, and also how your party platform is addressing that, and anything else.
Yeah, well, I think the issues are pretty much the same that you'd probably get anywhere. It's just that, I mean, and you know, and to be fair, that New York has definitely made improvements around various animal issues, so they're not completely ignored. There have been improvements in various particular points, but so I'd say that I don't think New York is sort of worse than most other places in that sense, but I think that it's a general issue of animal points really not being taken that seriously by politicians, and certainly not advocating, you know, vegan diets for ultimately as the ultimate end goal. There's certainly no mainstream party that's advocating that. So I think in terms of the practical issues are, it's getting people to run as candidates. And a particular point to bring up actually is the issue of ranked choice voting. So New York City adopted ranked choice voting for primary elections. In fact, Craig and I were both at the vote on this, right, Craig? When we
there are hearings in New York City.
Yeah, when that got decided, and we were advocating that they should also apply that to the general, you know, the general elections. But it was only applied at the primary election. So, you know, choosing which candidate is going to represent each party. So, you know, that's a massive issue. If you look around the world where animal parties have power, they are in proportional representation systems. That is it. You know, if you look at first past the post, which I'm English and American, both those countries have first past the post, which in a sense is really designed to keep out third parties. Because what we've already come under fire for having, not under fire, that's too strong a word, but we've had pushback from, you know, on social media in announcing our presidential run of our candidate this year. People saying, you know, this is too important an election to be running third party candidates. That's sort of that's that sort of response that can happen, right, within these electoral systems. So I definitely think that's a problem. People thinking that, oh, you know, why are you asking us about this third party when we should be focusing on this, you know, this election because it's too important. So that's an issue. And Craig, I don't know if there's plans to change that, to extend that to the general election. I haven't looked at what's happened on that front.
I know there are people working on that fight. In fact, some of that relates to you know, the animal rights issue, because when I first ran for state legislature in New York City, one of the groups that supported me was a group called FIDO, and that was because I was fighting for dog runs as a community board member, which is community board members are volunteer positions, not elected positions. And it was interesting that again, the companion animal issues set this off. But when I first ran, what I found is initially people viewed me as sort of like the Democrat who runs in November, because the Republican Party is so weak. The issue didn't seem to come up, and a lot of Democrats and some Republicans as well, who were frustrated with their candidates, would vote for me and would do so without fear. So I did okay, obviously never won, but I was able to break 10% in some of my runs, which is pretty good for a third party candidate.
Sure.
But what I found is what wasn't being represented is, although there were Democrats who were supportive of animal issues, you know, as Tracey alluded to, the problem is, if in the Democratic Party, within your own party, there's opposition to it. So while we've had a, a, a political push which has made the New York City hospital system, the public hospital system, primarily plant-based, what hasn't been able to happen is doing the same with the public schools. Also, there's an attempt to ban carriage horses, and there's opposition, strong opposition to that within the Democratic Party. There's also the issue of zoos in New York City, particularly the Bronx Zoo, and Happy the Elephant has been getting some press coverage. That these zoos are not appropriate for a lot of animals that didn't grow up in this kind of environment. And the other issue also is that there are 80 slaughterhouses in New York City, and people don't realize that. And there are eyesores in their neighborhood, besides the fact that obviously they're killing animals. And none of these tend to get the visibility as political issues as they should, because there are elements within the Democratic Party who suppress those issues. Now, at one time, New York City actually had proportional representation in the 1930s and 1940s. And there were as many as 5 political parties in the city council. And of course, the same Democratic Party, and specifically the Democrats in New York, not the Republicans, the Democrats who opposed that and eventually through initiative and referendum, which created it, used the very same initiative and referendum process to defeat it. And we've lost that democracy since then. And although they succeeded in ranked choice voting, it's been only in primaries because, of course, this is something the Democrats are okay with within their internal ranks. But what it assures is that voices like ours become subject to potential attack in the general election, as you're seeing on the presidential level. But even in New York City, there's just that mindset has become an obstacle that somehow, if you're an alternative party, you're a troublemaker. And the irony, it's the Democrats who have oppressed that. So part of supporting animal rights includes, as Tracey mentioned, as our appearance at the hearings, is including electoral reform. And there's an example, there's a good example of how these issues are connected. Here we're talking about animal rights and animal rights political party, but that's also rooted in electoral reform. We need ranked choice voting at the very least for general elections. And it would be great if in New York City we got back to proportional representation, because we had it before. And that would help create leverage for us and other alternative political parties too. So we have a real unifying issue with us and even those very small elements in the major parties that would like to see those reforms too. I mean, I know one of the reasons why when I ran, I got support from some Democratic clubs is they were frustrated with the results of the Democratic primary. So the reason why I think the Humane Party has potential viability is there are clearly elements in the public and even in the major party establishment who are not happy with their candidates. And they would be comfortable, I think, voting for our candidates if they were given that choice. And of course, this whole fear setup is part of the reason why it's so hard for us to find candidates. The interesting thing, the ballot access has actually gotten, although it's gotten more difficult in New York State, it's gotten easier in New York City. The petition rules are now, if you were to run as a Democrat for city council, you would generally need 450 valid signatures. If you run as a Humane Party candidate in New York City for city council, it's also 450 signatures. There's no difference. Wow, good. And they both have the same access to campaign finance as well. So here we are in New York City where at least in the municipal elections, we have a level playing field as far as ballot access is.
Yeah.
And why would it be difficult for us to find candidates? And part of that is the psychology of fear. So that's what we're up against, and that's why electoral reform is important, because it also gives us the opportunity to address the politics of fear, which is pervasive, becoming even more pervasive now on the national level.
Can I just say one thing about the fear? I think this is a really important point, because it's come up as exactly it's a deterrent to people running, and actually part of the fear is the toxic blowback on social media. The social media, a lot of it's become very toxic, and people are afraid to put themselves out there because they know that they are going to probably get some personal attack from somebody on social media, and concerns that people will be digging around, trying to dig up dirt. So I know that personally, when I spoke to somebody about running, that was one of the major fears that she brought up. So that's not necessarily a political concern, but it's something that is just the era that we are in with social media.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but and saying what Greg was saying about city council, I have to say New York is good in the sense that it has tried to create this more level playing field. And one of the important things it does is when a candidate, if they're registered appropriately with the city, is that if they get funds from individuals, the city will match that by a factor of 8. So literally, if somebody gave you $100, the city would contribute $800 to your campaign.
Wow, that's a good incentive.
It is a good incentive, and it's there to level out, corporate, and that would only apply to individual donors. So that they, to their credit, they have done that, and they've also got various training classes. So they have tried to make it accessible to run as a city council. But despite that, we haven't, other than myself and Craig has run before, we haven't had other candidates run. But we're hopeful that will change in the future.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry.
So what is your strategy for reaching voters and supporters of the Humane Party?
So we do have people that are signed up with Humane Party, and they're across the country. So we do reach out to them to encourage people to run. We have some meetup groups. So we do Facebook. That is stuff that we need to improve on, frankly. We need to get more savvy, I would say, with social media, and to address, and maybe to get up front of some of these issues that are discouraging people from running. Craig and I have talked about creating a program which helps support candidates and kind of helps them with some of the basics in terms of getting a ballot access, petitioning process, because they are very specific. They're not as scary probably as they sound once you know what's involved, but try and demystify that for candidates. So that is something we're looking to build out, is to demystify and de-fear the process, I guess, to encourage people to run. Craig, sorry, did you want to add anything to that, Craig?
Yeah, for my part of my personal history in using video and the importance of social media, which you're hearing here, and for podcasts like this, is I would like to focus on creating short videos for social media for outreach. I mean, younger people are gravitating towards social media, Instagram and TikTok particularly.
Yeah.
So part of that is understanding the language, and I should also mention that younger people are more likely to be vegan than older people. They're actually more vegan young people. So not only is it speaking the language, but it's a language that many of them, a message that many of them are understanding. So if they understand that there's an option to create an alternative party, and we know people are frustrated, especially young people, with the major parties, that focuses on these animal issues and ties them into the other issues in their life. I think that's a potentially attractive message. But again, social media is a very crowded field. and politics dominates it, often in a frustrating way by frustrating messengers. Because as Tracey pointed out, if you start talking about a third party, you're subject to attack. And for us, imagine if you're talking about animal issues, and so many vegans and animal rights activists are tied to the Democratic Party.
Oh no!
And it's ironic because it's often elements in the Democratic Party who are defeating them. A good example, I think, is the mayor of New York City, who sometimes is lauded for being plant-based. I mean, he was behind the move of pushing the New York City hospital system to plant-based predominant diet, in terms of his healthcare. But he's also particularly bad on animal rights. So he's plant-based as far as diet goes, but he has introduced and promoted methods of, for example, killing rats with poisons, which of course disturbs the entire ecosystem because, New York City also has birds of prey. People may not be aware of that feed on rats and or pigeons. And if you start poisoning one aspect of the food chain, you impact the entire animal chain. So these are the kinds of connections that might be messageable in social media in a way to display them so that people say, hey, I really should be supportive of all of New York City's non-human population because they're all connected and we're connected to them. And it's the elements in the Democratic Party that come up with these solutions that are actually quite anti-animal. So even though someone may say, well, you got to work through the Democratic Party. Yeah, well, people have. And that's the reason why they're being held back. It's the same reason why the trying to end horse-drawn carriages in New York City, which really serves no purpose other than a form of abusive entertainment. It's not integral to our economy even. Is that there's an element of the labor movement which has ties to many Democratic elected officials, so that even if such Democrats morally or ethically support that position, they won't do so politically, and that's why the political element is so important.
Sure.
And just, I know this is a national level sort of statistic that I'm quoting, but if you look at the Democratic Party platform document for 2016, it literally does not mention the word animal once. I think in 2020, I think it had one reference to some vague reference and non-specific to animal, I think might have said animal welfare, but that just shows you out of a 50, 60 page document, that is the priority they are attaching to animal issues. So that's a pretty objective measure of just how low down on the agenda this is considered. So yeah, naturally, it's a point of frustration for anyone who cares about animals.
Sure, makes sense. So since you two have become vegan successfully and have been doing it for a while, can you please give our audience some brief tips on how to become vegan?
Well, I guess I can just tell you about how I did it. And look, to be fair, I think some people find it easier than others. So I think that there might be some physiological differences between different kinds of people as to how their body behaves when they start to remove certain things from their diet. So for me, it was actually very, very easy. Maybe that's because I'm half Indian. I don't know. Maybe that helps. I don't know. But for me, physiologically, it turned out to be easy. But I think for people, it isn't. And this is not a Humane Party. This is not a Humane Party statement. This is my own statement. I would say phase it. If you're having trouble, I would say gradually do changes because I think your body has to adapt. That's one thing. I'm just talking about my own personal thing. I'm not a nutritionist or anything. I do supplement, so I take supplements. Probably I'm over 50, so I probably probably a good idea for anyone who's a bit older. Yeah, and I supplement, and I personally use. I'm not someone who cooks a lot from scratch, so I don't shy away from like pre-made products, which make life convenient for me. So I don't feel like I have to cook everything from scratch. So I will definitely buy, veggie burgers and things like that. Yeah, and I don't know, that's worked for me. That's all I can say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Do you have anything to add to Chris?
Craig. Yeah.
Craig, I'm sorry.
There's actually, because of the nature of New York City, there's actually some very specific New York City thinking in order to make it easy. Because I've heard a lot of the explanations on the obstacles. Some are more difficult than others. The biggest obstacles are actually friends and family. Because in social environments, and sometimes work, in social environments, you have to eat what's being made available to you if you're not the one cooking. And you have to get around that. Fortunately, I had a very supportive grandmother who, when I first became vegetarian, because I used to go over to her house, she didn't live too far from me, to eat once a week. And she immediately said that the first 5 years of her children's lives, they were fed plant-based diets. She said even though she herself wasn't vegetarian or vegan, she raised her children that way. And then when I told her that I was moving in that direction, she was actually very supportive and cooked for me.
Wow.
So the rest of my family was very hostile. You have to eat your meat. And that's one of the biggest obstacles. So in order to combat that, you have to look at how you reintegrate with your family. And Tracey mentioned phases. One of the things to do is when you're not with family and friends, that's the easiest way to be vegan, at least on those meals. And this impacts how you shop for yourself. Now, the problem some New Yorkers face is that a lot of the prepackaged food is expensive. And that's actually a political problem because it's where the subsidies go, and it's what happens into poorer neighborhoods. Like I noticed in my own neighborhood, which is in Bushwick, where a large portion of the population is on EBT, food stamps, that the cost of broccoli and the cost of low quality meat might make broccoli look more expensive.
Oh, wow.
So, and certainly the processed, the veggie burgers are crazy expensive. So the first step I would say is do try to cook for yourself and cook simple foods. One of the things that I did is I bought on discount a combination pressure cooker air fryer. So I make my own food where I can, so I don't have to buy processed food. But sometimes when I'm out in public, of course, the only options are the processed foods. But you try to offset that. And granted, there are people who have issues with vegan diets because there's no proper training. One of the things that has changed recently in New York City is because of the public hospital systems, that when I had health issues, in addition to them addressing my health issues, when I went into the hospital, I asked for an appointment with the dietitian. Now, the dietitian in the hospital was already vegan friendly, already plant-based friendly.
Okay.
So we were able to go over my diet and tweak it. So New York City public hospital system, which is far less expensive than private hospitals, actually gives the public access to the dietitians if they need it. If you're having an issue, if you're already moving plant-based and you have health issues, go to the public hospital and ask specifically to speak to a dietitian. So they'll help you in that arena. And it's good that New York City has that option. But the main tips are, you may need to learn to cook for yourself, get the appropriate cooking tools to do that, learn how to shop wisely. I think one of the things that's available in New York City, more so than some other areas, is farmers markets. If the grocery stores, because the grocery stores are geared towards processed foods and meat and animal products that are subsidized. That's not the case with the farmers markets. And often in the farmers markets, even if you're on EBT or food stamps, you can use those discounts at the farmers markets and get fresh food straight from the farmers without the processing. And often they'll help you with diet as well, because they're selling the produce directly. I mean, you can walk up and see something that you've never seen before and say, how do I cook this? And they'll gladly help you. So there's that access too. So the main tips are shop for yourself, use processed foods as a transition, but if you can't afford it, avail yourself to the resources to learn how to make things yourself, and avoid the public pressure, the family pressure, where you can. And fortunately, also in New York City, a lot of the restaurants are becoming savvy, because if 5 to 10% of the population is plant-based, and you're with a bunch of friends, and they say, let's go to this restaurant, and you say, well, I can't eat there, let's go to that restaurant. There are a lot of restaurants that are plant-based friendly. For example, White Castle has plant-based options. So if you're looking to go to a fast food place and somebody says McDonald's, you can counter and say, well, McDonald's doesn't offer me the options, let's go to White Castle. It's the same thing with, in my neighborhood, pizza places. I would probably say about 20% of the pizza places now have vegan or plant-based pizza options. So you're going to go towards the businesses and bring your friends to the businesses that have those options. And that's a thing, as an advocate of plant-based, even if you don't ask those people who you're going with to be plant-based, steer them to those establishments which support plant-based options. Those restaurants are aware, that's why they've made those switches. And you now set up an economic system where the plant-based restaurants will do better. And that's a form of economic encouragement. So take that impetus to become an educator, and to invite people to those establishments that support plant-based options, because there are, like I say, places like White Castle, there are many mainstream establishments now that focus on plant-based options. So that's an important tip to take.
Very true.
Yeah. And also, like, it's also good to call them in person and ask them explicitly, do you have any vegan options? Because if they have to say no, then hopefully that will provide, and by assumption you wouldn't be going if they've said that, then that gives them feedback that they're missing customers because of that. So that's always a good thing to do.
Yes, good idea. So Craig and Tracey, kindly tell our audience how they can support you in your efforts.
So, you can go to the Humane Party .org website and sign up and express your interest and whether you want to volunteer with us. And I would say even better if you would like to run as a candidate. That is something that we really want to get, a group of high quality candidates to run. We can support you at different levels. I mean, we are both based in New York, so that is our main focus, and we can help, with boots on the ground type activities. So,
sure.
Yeah, reach out. We also have a New York City focus website, which is humane.nyc, which is focused more on the local political process. So yeah, if
Okay.
and you can email myself directly. My email is Tracey with an E, Lall @gmail.com. Feel free to reach out directly. Yeah, so that is the main avenue.
You said humanenyc.org?
Humane.nyc. That's
Humane.
New York City. Yeah, Humane. So NYC is a New York City specific URL code.
Oh, okay. I never heard of that before, so that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit of New York City branding.
Okay, wow. Thank you, too, for coming on the podcast today and talking about your party, talking about veganism and animal rights.
Well, thank you for reaching out, Andrew. I really appreciate you taking the time to interview with us, and I also appreciate you being vegan. That's an added bonus to us talking to you.
Thank you.
And podcasts are another good avenue on social media to educate the public that there are options and that there's a place to go to if they're interested in working with the Humane Party, whether it's as a candidate or just as a supporter, or to integrate them in to help a candidate when a candidate does suggest running. I mean, there'll be a presidential candidate who will need lots of assistance, and that's a way to hook in. And oftentimes when you hook into a larger race, you develop local resources, and you can use those local resources for your own future campaign. Oftentimes the volunteer on a presidential campaign will have the opportunity of becoming the next city council candidate because they will develop local relationships while working on that campaign.
Sure. Sounds good. We wish you two all the best in your party endeavors and every other personal and professional endeavor you pursue.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and to yourself. I very much appreciate talking with you today.
Yes, thank you.
Right,
thank you for your effort.
Sure. Take care and all the best.
Thank you. You too. Bye.